Why was the room suddenly silent when the call dropped? Not a polite silence, not the kind that waits, the kind that knows something has just gone wrong. The screen at the far end of the executive boardroom went black, reflecting back a long table of frozen faces. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago moved as it always did. Traffic crawled. Snow drifted sideways between steel towers. The city didn't know a decision inside this room could cost thousands of jobs before lunch. Ethan Cole stood at the head of the table, one hand braced against the polished walnut, the other still holding a phone that had gone dead mid-sentence. 64 years old. Built like a man who had spent decades standing his ground. Gray hair cut short, jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped beneath his skin. "Say that again," he said, even though the line was gone. No one answered. Across from him, Marcus Doyle, general counsel, stared at the black screen as if it might blink back to life. His glasses slid down his nose. He didn't push them up. That alone told Ethan this was bad. The German delegation was already airborne. No translator, no fallback, and a clause buried deep in the contract that required real-time bilingual confirmation before any binding agreement could move forward. Ethan knew the clause. He had signed off on it himself 6 months earlier, back when time felt plentiful, and nothing ever slipped. Now it was slipping fast. "Where's Sandra?" Ethan said. His voice stayed level, but the room felt the pressure. She was confirmed. "She had a stroke," said Rachel Kim from operations. "Her hands were folded too neatly on the table. Minor, but she's in intensive care. We found out this morning." "And the backup." Rachel swallowed. "Flight canceled. Weather over the Atlantic." The silence thickened. The hum of the building's climate system grew louder, like it was filling space no one else could. Ethan looked around the table. Senior vice presidents. Legal. Finance. People who made 7 figures a year to prevent moments like this. No one met his eyes. Then the phone on the table buzzed. A single vibration. Short, sharp. Marcus picked it up. Red. His face drained. "They're moving the meeting up," he said. "Now. They're connecting from Frankfurt in 10 minutes. If we're not ready, they walk." Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, just long enough to feel the weight of it. 100-year-old manufacturing firm. Family-owned once, then public, then almost gone. He had pulled it back from the edge with ruthless focus. Shut down plants, cut pensions, saved the company. Or so he told himself. This deal was supposed to secure the next decade. Automation, European expansion, stability. 10 minutes. Find someone, Ethan said. Anyone. "We already called 3 agencies," Marcus said. "No one qualified can get here in time." Ethan's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. His knuckles went white. At the far end of the room, unnoticed by almost everyone, a woman stood quietly beside the sideboard. She wore a navy cleaning uniform, no logo, hair pulled back tight, hands steady as she set down a tray of empty coffee cups. Her name was Naomi Brooks, 60 years old. She had been in this building longer than most of the executives in the room. She knew the sound of every elevator, the smell of every floor, the way powerful men breathed when they were afraid but pretending not to be. Naomi didn't look up. She never did. That was the rule she'd learned early. Eyes down, quiet feet, invisible. The boardroom door swung open. A junior assistant hurried in, breathless tablet clutched to his chest. "They're on," he said. "Video link is live." The screen flickered. 2 men appeared. Both older, both precise. Martin Vogel and Hans Richter. Faces carved from discipline and expectation. They didn't smile. "Good morning," Ethan said. He straightened his jacket, rolled his shoulders back. "Thank you for adjusting the schedule." Vogel's eyes flicked to the side. A glance. A look shared. Then he spoke in German. Fast. Low. Hans replied. Longer. Sharper. The words rolled through the speakers like cold water. Ethan caught none of it. Marcus leaned in, whispering, "They're asking about the translator." Ethan forced a smile. "We had an unexpected medical emergency," he said carefully. "We're prepared to proceed in English." Another exchange, this one slower, heavier. Hans leaned forward, his face filling the screen. He spoke in accented English, precise and controlled. "This contract requires confirmation in German. You agreed to this condition." "Yes," Ethan said. "We did. Then why are we here without one?" The question landed hard. Behind the sideboard, Naomi froze. Not because of the words, because of the tone. She understood every syllable that had been spoken in German, every undercurrent, every implication. The frustration wasn't just procedural. It was personal, an insult unspoken but sharp. Ethan felt the room closing in. He nodded once. "We're working on a solution." Vogel said something again, this time with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus stiffened. He didn't translate. He couldn't. Ethan didn't ask. He already felt it. The judgment. The shift. Years ago, this man across the ocean would have begged for access to Ethan's factories. Now he sat back, calm, patient, waiting for Ethan to fail. Naomi's fingers curled around the edge of the tray. Her chest tightened. Not with fear, with memory. Berlin. A cramped apartment above a bakery. Late nights translating technical manuals no one else wanted to read. Negotiating contracts for men who never bothered to learn her name. Years spent mastering a language that demanded precision and punished arrogance. She had buried that life when her mother got sick. Then her husband. Then the jobs dried up. The interviews that ended politely when they saw her age. The offers that never came. This job paid the bills, gave her health insurance, gave her quiet. But the German words on the screen were wrong, not inaccurate, dangerous. They were assuming weakness, misreading hesitation as incompetence, turning a delay into leverage. Naomi knew exactly where this would go. Hans spoke again, in German, slower now, deliberate. Ethan felt his pulse spike. What did he say? Marcus hesitated. Just a beat too long. He said they're reconsidering the scope. Scope. The word sounded harmless. It wasn't. That meant stripping protections, shifting risk, moving jobs offshore. Ethan took a breath, deep, controlled, the way he had learned to breathe when things burned. "We are still prepared to proceed," he said firmly. "We honor our commitments." Vogel tilted his head, said something softly to Hans, a phrase Naomi knew well, one she had heard before in rooms like this. "They think loud means strong." Naomi's heart thudded once, hard. She looked up, just for a second, and for the first time in years, she broke her own rule. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't shake, but it carried. "Excuse me." Every head in the room snapped toward her. Ethan turned. His eyes narrowed not in anger, but confusion. He didn't recognize her. Had passed her 1,000 times without seeing her once. Naomi met the screen. Not the executives. The men in Germany. She spoke in German. Clean. Precise. Calm. She corrected a single assumption. One technical point. One misunderstanding that left unchallenged would unravel everything. The room didn't breathe. On the screen, Vogel's expression changed first. Surprise, then focus. Hans leaned closer, listening now. Ethan stood very still. The air shifted. And somewhere deep in the building, a machine hummed on, unaware that a woman everyone had overlooked had just stepped into the center of the storm. No one spoke for 3 full seconds, and in a room built for authority, silence felt like an accusation. Ethan Cole did not move. He stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the woman who had just spoken in a language no one knew she possessed. His first instinct was irritation, Not because she had interrupted, but because she had done so with precision, with confidence, with the kind of calm that did not ask for permission. On the screen, Martin Vogel leaned back in his chair. He did not look offended. He looked alert. Hans Richter adjusted his glasses slowly, the way men did when they wanted to hear every word twice. "Who is that?" Hans asked in German, his tone careful now. Naomi answered before anyone else could. She did not translate his question. She addressed him directly. She identified herself only by her first name. She clarified the technical assumption they had just made, then explained why it did not apply under American manufacturing law, specifically in Illinois, specifically for a company structured the way Ethan's was. Her words were not fast. They were deliberate, each sentence placed like a stone. Around the table, executives stared. Rachel Kim's lips parted slightly. Marcus Doyle's pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table, clacking softly against a glass of water. Ethan felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not relief. Not yet. It was the sensation of watching control leave his hands and reappear somewhere else. Somewhere unexpected. Hans nodded once. "You are correct," he said. "Our team misunderstood that provision." Naomi inclined her head. A small movement. Respectful. Not submissive. Vogel leaned forward. "You have experience with cross-border manufacturing agreements," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Naomi replied. "I have." "How recent?" "Not recent," she said honestly, "but thorough." Ethan finally spoke. "Naomi," he said, testing the name, "how do you know German?" Every eye turned back to him. Naomi did not look away from the screen. "I lived there," she said, "for a long time." "That's not an answer," Marcus said softly before he could stop himself. Naomi turned then. Her gaze met Marcus's. It was not sharp. It was tired. "It is the answer you need right now." Ethan felt the room tilt. Authority had shifted again. Subtle. Dangerous. Hans exchanged a look with Vogel. He smiled faintly. "We would like her to continue," he said, "if that is acceptable." Acceptable. The word struck Ethan harder than any insult. This was his boardroom, his deal, his risk. And yet every instinct he had built over 40 years told him the truth. "Yes," he said, "it's acceptable." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. Naomi hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Not fear. Calculation. Then she set the tray down, smoothed the front of her uniform, and walked to the table. Her steps were quiet, measured. Each one carried the weight of years spent knowing when not to walk forward. She sat. The camera angle shifted. The German executives adjusted their posture. The dynamic had changed, and everyone in the room felt it. Hans began again, this time outlining concerns about supply chain exposure. Naomi listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she responded by reframing the concern as a shared risk, not a flaw. She did not soften the language. She sharpened it, turning apprehension into collaboration. Ethan watched her hands. Still. No tremor, no fidgeting. This was not luck. This was someone who had done this before and survived it. Rachel leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "Do you know her background?" Ethan shook his head once. His jaw was tight. Not yet. On the screen, Vogel tested her. He switched dialects. Southern German. Faster. Idiomatic. Designed to catch pretenders. Naomi did not blink. She responded in the same dialect, adjusting her tone, her rhythm mirroring him, just enough to signal understanding without mockery. Vogel smiled openly now. "That was not in your resume," he said lightly. I didn't submit one, Naomi replied. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the screen. Not mocking, appreciative. Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes. Not anger, recognition. And beneath it, something colder. Guilt. He had walked past this woman every morning for years. Nodded once, if at all. Never asked her name until today. The meeting moved faster now. Momentum built. Each exchange tightened the threads that had been fraying minutes earlier. Naomi did not dominate the conversation. She guided it. Redirected when Ethan's impatience showed. Clarified when Marcus overcomplicated. She never corrected Ethan directly. She adjusted the frame so his words landed better. It was a skill Ethan had seen in seasoned negotiators. Men paid obscene amounts of money to do exactly this. At one point, Hans paused. You protect his position, he said, gesturing to Ethan. But you do not excuse his mistakes. Naomi met his gaze. That is the difference between loyalty and competence. Ethan inhaled sharply. The words were not an attack. They were a line drawn cleanly between ego and responsibility. The meeting ended without applause, without ceremony, just agreement. Conditional, careful, but alive. When the screen went dark again, the silence returned. Different this time. Heavy, reflective. No one spoke until Marcus cleared his throat. Well, he said. That happened. Rachel let out a breath she had been holding. You just saved us, she said to Naomi, her voice unsteady. Naomi shook her head. No, she said. You were already standing on solid ground. You just couldn't see it. Ethan stood, slowly. He did not tower over her. He stood beside her. How long, he asked quietly, have you been capable of that? Naomi looked at him for the first time without filtering her expression. Longer than you've been CEO. The truth landed without cruelty. It didn't need to wound. It simply existed. Ethan nodded once. Why are you here? The question was not accusatory. It was bewildered, almost personal. Naomi folded her hands on the table. Because when I stopped being useful on paper, I stopped being visible. This job paid the bills. It let me disappear. That's not an answer, Ethan said. It's the only honest one, she replied. No one interrupted. Outside, the city kept moving. Snow pressed against glass. Sirens echoed faintly between buildings. Ethan exhaled. A long breath. You understand that what you did today puts me in a position? Yes, Naomi said. I do. You could have embarrassed me. I chose not to, she said, because embarrassment teaches nothing. Consequences do. He studied her. Really studied her. The lines at the corners of her eyes, the steadiness of her posture, the absence of fear. You don't want a promotion, he said. No, she replied. I want clarity. About whether this place values what people know, she said, or only where they sit. The room felt smaller. Ethan glanced around. At Marcus, at Rachel, at the others who had watched power shift without warning. He nodded. We'll talk, he said. Not today, but soon. Naomi stood, pushed her chair in, picked up the tray. She paused at the door. Mr. Cole. Yes. Next time you negotiate with people who don't share your language, she said, assume they hear more than you think. Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. Ethan remained standing long after everyone else filed out. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass. Older than he remembered. Less certain. And for the first time in years, aware that control was not something you held. It was something you earned again and again from people you were willing to see. Outside, Chicago kept breathing. Inside, the ground had shifted, and nothing in this building would ever feel quite as stable again. The boardroom emptied in stages, not all at once, as if no one wanted to be the first to admit the moment was over. Ethan Cole remained standing long after the door closed behind the last executive. The table still held the faint rings of coffee cups, the ghost of urgency pressed into polished wood. He loosened his tie, then tightened it again, a nervous habit he hadn't noticed in years. Outside the glass, the city breathed on indifferent. He replayed the sound of Naomi's voice in his head. Calm, certain, unafraid, not loud, never loud. For 40 years, Ethan had built a world where the loudest voice usually won. Now that rule felt thin. He left the boardroom alone. The hallway lights hummed softly. Carpets muffled footsteps. When he reached the elevator bank, he saw her down the corridor, already back in motion, pushing her cart with steady hands, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Naomi," he said. She stopped, turned. No hesitation, no surprise. She had expected this. "Yes, Mr. Cole." He gestured toward a small conference room off the main hallway. "A minute." She followed him in. The door clicked shut, sealing them into a quieter space. No windows, just a table, 2 chairs, a muted hum of machinery behind the walls. Ethan did not sit. Neither did she. "You understand the position you put me in," he said. "Yes. You understand that what you did today could have gone very differently." "Yes." He studied her face, searching for defiance. He found none. Only resolve. Then why, he asked, did you do it? Naomi took a breath. Not deep. Controlled. "Because I've watched deals fall apart for reasons that had nothing to do with money," she said, "and because I recognized what they were doing. They weren't just negotiating. They were testing whether you were listening." "That's my job," Ethan said. "It's everyone's job," she replied. The answer unsettled him more than any challenge. "You didn't ask permission." "No," she said. "I waited until permission would have been too late." Ethan exhaled through his nose, a habit he had when he was holding back a reaction. "How long have you worked here?" 10 years, she said. "On paper. And before that." She looked at the wall for a moment as if the past were written there. Consulting, translation, contract support, small firms, medium firms, no one whose name you'd recognize. And then my mother got sick. Then my husband. Then I was 50 and invisible. The word hung between them. Invisible. Ethan had used that word once years ago describing a competitor who had missed a market shift. He had never applied it to a person. "You could have told someone," he said. She nodded. "I did. A few times. HR. A recruiter. An executive assistant who meant well but didn't follow up. And eventually I stopped explaining," she said. "Explaining is expensive." Silence settled. Not hostile. Reflective. Ethan finally sat. The chair creaked under his weight. He gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated, then sat across from him, posture straight, hands folded loosely. "You're aware," he said, "that if this becomes public, it creates questions." "Yes. Questions about oversight, about how someone like you ends up pushing a cart instead of sitting at the table." "Yes. And questions," he continued, his voice lower now, "about what else I've missed." Naomi met his eyes. "Those questions already exist. You've just been insulated from them." He felt the sting. Not because it was unfair, because it wasn't. "You saved this deal," he said. "No," she replied. "I slowed it down. That's the same thing Ethan said." "It isn't," Naomi said. "Saving something preserves it as it is. Slowing it down gives it a chance to change." Ethan leaned back. The room felt smaller. Or maybe he did. "Do you want something?" he asked. The question was blunt, direct. The way deals were made. Naomi shook her head. Not today. He frowned. That's not how this works. It is for me, she said. If you offer me something now, it looks like payment. I didn't do this for leverage. Then why stay here? Ethan asked. Why not walk out? She considered that. Because I care what happens next, and because I know how this place works. Change doesn't come from one dramatic moment. It comes from what follows. Ethan nodded slowly. You're asking for time. I'm asking for intention, she corrected. He looked down at the table. The faint scratches, the wear of years. You understand, he said, that I can't rewrite this company overnight. I understand, Naomi said. I'm not asking you to. Another pause, longer this time. Ethan stood, walked to the door, then stopped. If I asked you to sit in on the next negotiation, he said, not as staff, as support, quietly. Naomi didn't answer right away. Would I be allowed to speak? Yes. And would it be noted? He hesitated. Eventually, she nodded once. Then I would consider it. He turned back to her. You're careful. I've learned to be, she said. He opened the door. We'll talk again. Naomi stood. I know. She left him there. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Calls, briefings, damage control. Ethan moved through it all with the practiced efficiency of a man who had built a career on endurance. But something had shifted beneath the surface, a hairline fracture running through routines he had never questioned. That evening, as the building emptied, Ethan stayed late. He walked the halls without escort, past offices dark and silent. He noticed things he hadn't before: family photos, handwritten notes, the small human debris of lives that existed beneath quarterly reports. Near the maintenance corridor, he saw Naomi again. She was finishing up wiping down a counter, movements precise, unhurried. You don't rush, he observed. I don't need to, she replied. No one's waiting on me. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. Tomorrow, Ethan said, my chief of staff will call you. Naomi nodded. I'll answer. And Naomi? Yes. You were right about something today. She looked at him. I don't listen as well as I think I do, he said. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. Most people don't, she said, especially when they've been right for a long time. He watched her push the cart down the hall, the sound of its wheels fading into the building's low hum. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the strange discomfort of knowing the ground beneath him was not as solid as he'd believed. Outside, the snow had stopped. The city lights reflected clean and sharp off the pavement. Tomorrow, the headlines would talk about market optimism and strategic alignment. They would not mention the woman in the cleaning uniform or the moment everything almost collapsed. But Ethan would remember, because the most dangerous thing he had learned that day was not that he could lose control. It was that control had never really been his to begin with. The call came the next morning before the building was fully awake. Naomi was in the supply room restocking paper towels when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She let it ring once before answering. Old habits. No rush. This is Naomi Brooks, she said. Ms. Brooks, a woman's voice replied, professional measured. This is Claire Bennett, Chief of Staff to Mr. Cole. He asked me to reach out. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Not in relief. In preparation. I'm listening. There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers shifting. Mr. Cole would like you to sit in on a follow-up call this afternoon. Observational only. He wants your presence noted but not highlighted. Naomi pictured the boardroom again. The table. The silence. The way power had leaned when it thought no one was watching. And if something goes wrong, she asked, "Am I allowed to speak?" "Yes," Claire said, "but only if you believe it's necessary." Naomi smiled faintly. "That's always the question." By noon, the building buzzed with controlled urgency. The markets had stabilized overnight. Emails flew. Lawyers adjusted language. The deal lived but just barely like something fragile that could still break if handled wrong. Ethan arrived early to the boardroom this time. He stood at the window watching workers clear snow from the sidewalks below. Men in reflective jackets, bent backs, cold hands. He had walked past people like that his whole life without wondering what they knew. When Naomi entered the room, shifted again. Not dramatically, subtly. Heads turned. A few people straightened in their chairs. Others avoided her eyes, suddenly aware of how little they knew about the woman they had shared hallways with for a decade. She took a seat near the wall, not at the table. She had chosen that spot deliberately. The screen lit up. Vogel and Richter appeared again this time, joined by a third man, younger, sharper. Lucas Brandt, finance, known for dismantling weak positions with surgical patience. "Good afternoon," Ethan said. "Good afternoon," Vogel replied. His eyes flicked briefly toward Naomi. Not curiosity. Recognition. The discussion began carefully. Supply chain timelines, labor cost exposure, environmental compliance across borders. Lucas spoke the most. He was calm, methodical, precise. Every question was framed as a courtesy, every challenge wrapped in politeness. Naomi listened. 10 minutes in, Ethan felt it again. The subtle pressure, the way the questions were narrowing. Not wrong, strategic. Lucas was steering them toward a concession that would look small on paper and grow expensive over time. Marcus leaned toward Ethan, whispering numbers. Rachel shuffled documents, trying to keep pace. Naomi said nothing. Ethan glanced at her once. She did not meet his eyes. Her focus was on the screen. On Lucas's hands, on the rhythm of his speech. Then Lucas switched languages. Not fully, just a phrase. A sentence slipped into German, delivered casually, almost lazily. Naomi stiffened. She heard the implication immediately. It wasn't about the numbers. It was about respect. About whether the American side was following closely enough to catch what wasn't being translated. Ethan missed it. Marcus didn't react. Naomi waited. Lucas continued. Another phrase, this one sharper. He was testing the boundary now, seeing how far he could go without consequence. Naomi inhaled. "Mr. Brandt," she said calmly in German. The room froze again. Not shock this time. Tension. That framing assumes labor cost elasticity that does not exist in the Midwest. She continued, her tone even. "And you know it." Lucas blinked. "Just once." "You are well informed," he said. "I am attentive," Naomi replied. "There's a difference." Vogel smiled. Richter leaned back, folding his arms. The balance tipped, not dramatically, but enough. Ethan felt it. A tightening in his chest. Not fear, awareness. Lucas nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we should revisit that assumption." Perhaps Naomi agreed. The call continued. Adjustments were made. Language softened. The concession dissolved into something mutual. When the screen went dark, no one spoke right away. This silence was different. It carried weight. Marcus turned to Naomi. "You caught that?" he said quietly. "Yes." "I didn't?" he admitted. "No," she said. "You were busy defending." Ethan stood. "That's enough for today." People filed out slower than usual. Conversations stayed hushed. Glances lingered. When the door closed, Ethan remained. Naomi stayed seated. "That wasn't part of the plan," he said. "No," she replied. "But it was part of the game." He nodded. "You understood the angle. I understood the intention," she said. "That matters more." He studied her. "They're going to push back harder now." "I know. And if they do, they reveal themselves," Naomi said. "Which saves time." Ethan laughed softly. A single sound. Unplanned. You make it sound simple. It's not, she said. It's just familiar. He walked to the window again. Claire will formalize your role, he said, quietly. Advisory. Limited scope. Naomi considered that. I don't want an office. You won't get one, he said. I don't want a title that isolates me. He turned. You won't get that either. She nodded. Then I'll stay. That afternoon, word spread. Not officially, never officially, but people noticed. Naomi was invited to meetings she hadn't been before. Not many. Enough. Some nodded to her now. Others looked uncomfortable. A few looked resentful. One executive cornered her near the elevators. You've been holding out on us, he said with a forced smile. Naomi met his gaze. I've been minding my business. By evening, the building quieted. Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at an old photograph on his desk. His father in a factory uniform, hands stained with grease, eyes tired, proud. He wondered what his father would have thought of today. Down the hall, Naomi finished her shift. She paused by the window overlooking the street. Cars passed. People hurried home. Life moved. Claire appeared beside her. You handled that well, she said. Naomi shrugged. I handled it honestly. Claire hesitated. Not everyone is comfortable with what you represent. Naomi smiled not unkindly. That's usually the case. As she stepped into the elevator, Naomi felt something she hadn't in years. Not triumph, not vindication, momentum. The doors closed softly. Above her, the building hummed, adjusting to a new weight distribution. Somewhere deep inside its structure, unseen supports were being tested. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi did not feel invisible at all. The first sign of resistance came quietly, the way real opposition always does. Naomi felt it before anyone said a word. A calendar invite disappeared without explanation. A meeting she had been asked to observe was suddenly rescheduled. A hallway conversation stopped when she approached. Nothing overt, nothing she could point to, just the subtle tightening of space around her. By midweek, Ethan noticed it too. He sat in his office reviewing revised term sheets when Claire Bennett stepped in, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. We have a problem, she said. Ethan didn't look up. We have several. This one's internal. That made him pause. He set the papers down. Go on. There's pushback from 2 senior VPs, Claire said. Manufacturing and regional operations. They're questioning Naomi's presence. Not openly. They're framing it as concern for process integrity. Ethan leaned back. Process integrity. Yes, Claire said. They don't like that she speaks without being on the org chart. Ethan exhaled slowly. She speaks because she knows when to. That's not how they see it. Of course not. Claire hesitated. They're requesting that all advisory input be formally routed through legal going forward. Ethan's jaw tightened. That would silence her. Yes. Who's behind it? Claire named them. Both men in their late 50s, both with long tenure. Both built their authority on knowing how things had always been done. Ethan nodded once. Let them try. The next meeting was larger. More people, more layers. Naomi took her usual seat near the wall. She did not bring a notebook. She never did. She listened. Halfway through, one of the VPs cleared his throat. Before we continue, he said, glancing briefly at Ethan, I'd like to clarify roles in the room. Naomi felt the air shift. We've been operating under unusual circumstances, he continued. For the sake of consistency, perhaps contributions should come through designated channels. Ethan said nothing. Eyes turned to Naomi, some curious, some uncomfortable, a few almost hopeful. Naomi waited. Ethan folded his hands. If you're suggesting she shouldn't speak, he said calmly, say it. The VP smiled thinly. I am suggesting we protect the structure. Naomi finally spoke. Structures don't protect themselves, she said evenly. People do. The VP's smile faltered. With respect, this is not your department. No, Naomi said. It's your blind spot. A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan watched carefully. This was not the explosive confrontation some might have expected. This was slower, more dangerous. Enough, Ethan said. His voice cut clean. Naomi is here because she sees what others miss. That's not a threat to the structure. That's a correction. The VP leaned back, lips pressed together. He said nothing more. After the meeting, Ethan asked Naomi to stay. You didn't have to do that, he said once they were alone. Yes, she replied. I did. He studied her. You're making enemies. She nodded. I expected that. Why keep pushing? Naomi looked at him. Because if I stop now, everything I said before becomes a performance. That night, Naomi didn't go straight home. She stopped at a diner a few blocks from her apartment. Same booth she'd sat in for years. Same waitress who knew her order without asking. Black coffee. Toast. Nothing fancy. She watched people come and go. Construction workers. Office clerks. Retirees with time on their hands and stories no one asked for. She had lived most of her life among people like this. Capable. Invisible. Carrying weight quietly. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Be careful. You're being watched. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into her pocket. Fear flickered brief and controlled. She had been watched her whole life. It hadn't stopped her then. The following day, the Germans sent revised terms, more aggressive, subtly punitive. The message was clear. They sensed internal friction and intended to exploit it. Ethan called Naomi into his office. He shut the door himself this time. They're pushing, he said. They will, Naomi replied. You think they know about the internal resistance. They feel it, she said. Organizations broadcast weakness the way people do. Through hesitation. He nodded. And what do you suggest? Naomi took a breath. You stop shielding me. Ethan frowned. Explain. You let them see me, she said. Not as an anomaly, as part of the decision-making. That will escalate things internally. Yes, she said. Which forces honesty. He considered that. You're asking me to risk open conflict. I'm asking you to choose what kind of conflict you want, Naomi replied. The quiet kind that eats from the inside, or the visible kind that clears the air. Ethan looked at the city beyond the glass. He thought of his father again, of arguments on factory floors, of men who shouted because they had never been taught how to speak any other way. Tomorrow, he said, you sit at the table. Naomi's expression did not change, but something eased in her shoulders. Then tomorrow, she said, we find out who's actually here to build. The next morning, she wore the same uniform. She did not dress up. She did not change her voice. She took the seat beside Ethan when he gestured to it. The reactions were immediate. Some stiffened. Others looked away. A few nodded almost imperceptibly. The German delegation joined the call. Vogel noticed instantly. His eyes flicked from Ethan to Naomi and back. You've expanded your team, he said. Yes, Ethan replied. We've clarified it. Naomi met Vogel's gaze. Calm, unapologetic. The discussion began. This time when German was spoken, it was translated openly. When tactics shifted, they were named. When pressure mounted, it was acknowledged. The deal did not become easier. It became cleaner. Afterward, when the room finally emptied, one of the VPs lingered. He looked at Naomi, then at Ethan. "I didn't know," he said. Naomi nodded. "Most people don't." That evening, Ethan stood alone again in his office. The city lights burned brighter now, reflecting off wet streets. He felt the strain of the week settle into his bones. Naomi paused at his door. "You're tired," she said. "So are you." "Yes," she agreed. "But this kind of tired means something changed." He looked at her. "You're not done, are you?" "No," Naomi said. "Neither are you." She left him with that. And for the first time since the crisis began, Ethan did not feel like he was bracing for collapse. He felt like he was standing in the middle of a storm that was finally telling the truth about where it wanted to go. The email arrived just after midnight, unsigned, forwarded from an address that did not exist 5 minutes earlier and would not exist 5 minutes from now. Naomi read it once, then again, slower the second time. The language was polite, clinical, the kind of language used by people who believed they were being reasonable while crossing a line. "We advise you to reconsider your current involvement. Certain histories are better left untouched." She did not delete it. She did not reply. She set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay awake, listening to the radiator tick in her apartment, counting the spaces between sounds the way she had learned to do years ago when worry threatened to take over. By morning, the building felt different. Not hostile, watchful. Security nodded to her as usual, but one of them held her gaze a beat too long. On her way down the hall, she noticed a man she did not recognize standing near the elevators. Suit too new, posture too alert. He pretended to check his phone when she passed. Naomi did not change her pace. In Ethan's office, Claire Bennett stood by the window, arms folded. Ethan sat at his desk, a printed document laid out between them. When Naomi entered, neither spoke right away. "You got it too," Ethan said finally. Naomi nodded. "Yes." Claire exhaled. "So it's not random." Ethan slid the paper toward Naomi. It was a memo from internal compliance flagged urgent, a request for documentation, background verification, scope of authority review, language neutral, timing precise. "They're initiating a review," Claire said. "On you, and on how you came to be involved." Naomi read the memo carefully. "This isn't about process," she said. "It's about leverage." Ethan watched her closely. "What aren't we seeing?" Naomi looked up. "Before I worked here, I consulted on a cross-border acquisition that went wrong. Not because of fraud, because of silence." Claire's eyebrows drew together. "Explain." "The American firm ignored warnings about labor compliance in Eastern Europe," Naomi said. "I raised concerns. They proceeded anyway. When the penalties came down, they blamed the translator. Me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Were you at fault?" "No," Naomi said. "But I was convenient. And you didn't fight it." "I did," she said. "I lost." Claire's voice softened. "That's why you disappeared." Naomi nodded. "That's why I chose quiet." Ethan leaned back. "So someone dug this up." "Yes," Naomi said. "And they think reminding me will make me step back." "It won't," Ethan said. Naomi met his eyes. "It might cost you." Ethan smiled without humor. Everything costs something. The review moved fast, too fast, requests multiplied, interviews scheduled. Old contacts reached out, some with concern, others with questions that felt rehearsed. Naomi answered carefully, truthfully. She had nothing to hide, but she understood how truth could be shaped. The Germans noticed the shift before anyone said a word. Vogel sent a brief message requesting clarification on governance stability. Richter asked whether internal authority structures were in flux. "They smell blood," Marcus said during a late meeting. "They smell fear," Naomi corrected, "which is worse." Ethan made a decision that night. He called for an all-hands executive session the next morning. No agenda distributed, no pre-reads, just presence. The room filled slowly. Familiar faces, a few new ones. The man from the elevator sat in the back observing, taking notes. Ethan stood. He did not wait for quiet. He let the murmur die on its own. "There's been a review initiated," he said. "You all know that." Eyes shifted. No one spoke. "It concerns process," he continued, "but it also concerns trust. And I want to be clear about something before this goes any further." He gestured to Naomi, seated at the table, now not near the wall. "She's here because she's competent," Ethan said. "Not because I needed a symbol, not because of optics, because she sees what others don't and speaks when others won't." One of the VPs cleared his throat. "With respect, this creates exposure." Ethan nodded. "Everything does." The man from the back raised a hand slightly. "Mr. Cole," he said, "as external counsel, I'd advise caution in making statements that could be construed as." Ethan cut him off. "I didn't hire you to construe my words." The room stilled. Naomi felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Not gratitude, recognition, shared risk. After the meeting, the council requested a private conversation. Ethan declined. The Germans pushed again. This time openly. A revised proposal arrived with tighter deadlines and sharper penalties. "They think we're distracted," Rachel said. "We are," Ethan replied. "Just not the way they think." Naomi reviewed the proposal line by line. "They're setting a trap," she said. "If we accept, they gain control. If we delay, they claim breach." "So, what do we do?" Marcus asked. Naomi looked at Ethan. "We changed the frame. They scheduled a call. Not to negotiate, to clarify values." Vogel appeared skeptical. Richter looked curious. Lucas watched closely. Naomi spoke early. She addressed the review directly. In German, calm, transparent. She acknowledged the scrutiny, the past, the mistake that had ended her previous career. She did not defend it. She contextualized it. "The risk you are sensing," she said, "is not instability. It is accountability." Vogel frowned. "Accountability is expensive." "Yes," Naomi said. "But unpredictability is more so." There was a pause. Long, uncomfortable. Then Richter nodded. "You are saying this company is choosing exposure over pretense?" "Yes," Ethan said, "because pretense is fragile." The call ended without agreement, without rupture. Something else had happened. Respect, maybe, or caution. That afternoon, compliance concluded its review. Findings inconclusive. No wrongdoing. Recommendations vague. Authority unchanged. The unsigned emails stopped. The man by the elevators disappeared. That evening, Naomi packed her things slowly. Claire stopped by her desk. "You okay?" Claire asked. Naomi nodded. "Yes." "You know this isn't over." "I know," Naomi said. "But it's out in the open now." Claire smiled faintly. "You're harder to corner than they expected." Naomi shrugged. "I've had practice." As she left the building, the sky was low and gray. The city smelled like rain. She paused on the steps, breathing in the moment. Ethan watched from his office window as she crossed the street, coat pulled tight, moving with the same quiet assurance she always had. He felt something settle inside him. Not certainty, commitment. Control, he realized, was not about silencing risk. It was about standing beside it when it spoke. And for the first time since this began, he knew exactly where he stood. The pressure didn't come from above this time. It came from the sides. Naomi felt it in the pauses between conversations, in the way decisions stalled just long enough to be noticed. Files that once moved cleanly through departments now lingered. Questions were asked twice. clarifications requested that had already been given. No one openly opposed her presence anymore. That would have been too obvious. Instead, the resistance learned to disguise itself as caution. Ethan saw it as well. He watched meetings stretch longer than necessary, watched capable people hedge when they never had before. He recognized the tactic. He had used it himself years earlier when a rival threatened his position, and confrontation would have drawn the wrong kind of attention. Delay was a language of power. The Germans called for an in-person session, not a negotiation, not a signing, a visit. They wanted to see the plant. The request landed on Ethan's desk late in the afternoon. He read it twice, then looked up at Naomi, who sat across from him, reviewing a production timeline. "They're testing us," he said. "Yes," Naomi replied. "And they're testing you." Ethan leaned back. "You think they'll push for concessions on the floor?" "I think they'll push to see who speaks when it matters," she said. The plant in Joliet had been running for over 60 years. It was loud, physical, unapologetically industrial, steel, grease heat, the kind of place where decisions carried weight because mistakes could hurt people. When Vogel, Richter, and Lucas arrived 2 days later, they dressed appropriately. No suits, jackets, work boots, not new. Ethan noticed that. They walked the floor together. Managers explained processes. Engineers outlined safeguards. Vogel listened. Richter asked pointed questions. Lucas watched people, not machines. Naomi stayed slightly back, letting the rhythm reveal itself. She listened to what wasn't being said. The slight tension when a supervisor answered too quickly. The pride in a machinist's voice when he described a fix he'd engineered on his own time. Halfway through, Lucas stopped near an assembly line. He spoke in German to Vogel low enough that most people wouldn't catch it. Naomi did. "He's not in control here. The place runs itself." Naomi stepped forward. "That's exactly why it works," she said in German. "Control isn't centralized. Responsibility is." Lucas looked at her sharply. "You speak for the workers now. I speak for systems that last." Naomi replied. "They don't survive on oversight alone." Vogel watched the exchange closely. Richter nodded once thoughtful. Later, in a quieter room off the floor, they sat around a metal table scarred by years of use. Coffee was poured into chipped mugs. No polished glass. No screens. "This place," Vogel said, "is different from your headquarters." "It has to be," Ethan said. "This is where consequences live." Lucas leaned forward. "Your internal tensions," he said, choosing his words carefully, "they concern us." Ethan met his gaze. "They should." "That's not reassuring." "No," Ethan said. "It's honest." Naomi watched Vogel's reaction. He wasn't offended. He was assessing. "You are allowing disagreement," Vogel said. "Yes," Ethan replied, "openly. And you believe that strengthens your position." "I believe pretending consensus is stronger than it is leads to collapse," Ethan said. Silence followed. Not awkward. Measured. Richter spoke next. "In our companies," he said, "we learned this lesson late. It cost us." Naomi felt the shift then. Not agreement. Alignment. That evening over dinner at a modest restaurant near the plant, the conversation turned personal. Not warm, but human. Vogel spoke about his first job sweeping floors in a factory outside Stuttgart. Lucas mentioned a grandfather who had lost work when a plant closed after executives ignored warnings. Richter said little, but when he did, people listened. Naomi noticed Ethan listening differently now, not waiting for his turn, absorbing. After dessert, Vogel addressed Naomi directly. You don't behave like an advisor, he said. No, she agreed. I don't. You behave like someone with nothing to prove. Naomi smiled faintly. That took time. The next morning, the Germans requested a private session, just Ethan and Naomi. In the conference room overlooking the plant, Vogel got to the point. We believe this partnership can work, he said, but not under the assumptions we began with. Richter added, we need assurance that the voice we heard will not be sidelined once papers are signed. Ethan did not look at Naomi. He answered immediately. It won't be. Lucas studied him. That's a promise. Yes. And if the board resists. Ethan paused. This was the moment Naomi had been preparing for. The moment where principle either held or folded. Then the board adjusts, Ethan said. Or I do. The words hung heavy. Naomi felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Respect. Vogel nodded slowly. That answer carries risk. Yes, Ethan said again. The agreement they reached was not perfect. It was slower, more conditional, built with safeguards that required ongoing dialogue, not one-time assurances. As the Germans departed, Vogel shook Naomi's hand. Firm. Equal. You change the temperature, he said quietly. No, Naomi replied. You noticed it. When the building settled back into its routine, the resistance shifted again. Quieter now, less certain. One VP resigned 2 weeks later. Cited personal reasons. Another requested early retirement. No announcement, no drama. People adjusted. Ethan noticed younger managers speaking up more, older ones listening longer. Meetings became shorter, sharper, less theatrical. One afternoon, as Naomi gathered her things, Ethan stopped by her desk. They're asking about your role, he said. She looked up. Who? Everyone. She nodded. And what are you telling them? The truth, Ethan said, that you're here because you make us better. Naomi considered that. That won't satisfy them. No, Ethan said, but it will set expectations. That night, Naomi walked home under a sky clearing after rain. The city lights reflected in puddles like fragments of another world. She thought of the email, the review, the plant floor, the men who had tried to quiet her and the ones who had listened. Power, she realized, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it endured. Sometimes it spoke only when silence became dangerous. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight she carried being shared, not resisted. Somewhere above her, in offices still lit late into the night, decisions were being made that would shape lives she would never meet. This time, she knew her voice would be part of them. The announcement was never meant to be an announcement. It slipped out during a quarterly briefing, buried between inventory adjustments and long-term projections, spoken in Ethan Cole's steady voice, as if it were a footnote rather than a line that would quietly redraw the map. Effective immediately, he said, eyes scanning the room, Naomi Brooks will serve as Senior Advisory Liaison on all cross-border operations. A few heads lifted. A few pens paused. No applause. No visible reaction. That was intentional. Naomi sat 2 rows back, hands folded in her lap. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at anyone. She listened to the silence that followed and measured it. Not hostile, not warm, something in between. Acceptance had not arrived yet, but resistance no longer owned the room. After the meeting, the questions came anyway. Not to Ethan, to her. A director from logistics caught up to Naomi near the elevators. So you're international now? He said, trying to sound casual. I always was, Naomi replied and stepped inside before he could respond. By the end of the week, her calendar filled in ways she hadn't expected. Short meetings, long ones, conversations that began stiff and ended thoughtful, a few that ended nowhere at all. The hardest weren't the skeptics. They were predictable. The hardest were the ones who came quietly, almost apologetic. "I didn't know," one manager said, closing the door behind him. "If I had—" "You would have done what you thought was right at the time," Naomi said gently. "That's usually how it works." He nodded, relieved she hadn't asked him to confess. Ethan watched all of it from a distance. He resisted the urge to intervene to smooth edges, to shield her from discomfort. He had learned that protection could be another form of control. The Germans sent confirmation the following Monday. Not celebratory. Precise. The partnership would move forward under the revised framework. Longer timeline. Shared oversight. Ongoing review. Stable. That word appeared twice in the message. When Ethan read it, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not victory. Stability had its own quiet satisfaction. Naomi received a separate note from Vogel later that day. Short. Direct. Your presence has changed how we evaluate risk. That is not insignificant. She read it once, then closed the message. Compliments she had learned could become expectations if you held onto them too tightly. The resistance did not disappear overnight. It adapted. A rumor circulated that Naomi was being positioned as Ethan's successor. Absurd. She laughed when Claire mentioned it. "They need a story," Naomi said. "This one scares them less than the truth." "And the truth is that I'm not here to replace anyone," Naomi replied. "I'm here to ask different questions." Ethan overheard that from the doorway. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The first public test came sooner than expected. A labor dispute surfaced at one of the smaller plants. Not a strike. A grievance. Long-standing. Poorly documented. Easy to dismiss if you weren't listening. Ethan brought it to Naomi without preamble. "They're escalating. They usually do when they've been quiet too long," she said. "You want to handle it." "I want to hear it," Naomi replied. "Handling comes later." They drove out together. No entourage, no press, just the two of them and a plant manager who looked increasingly uncomfortable the closer they got. The meeting took place in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and oil, folding chairs, a whiteboard with outdated schedules. Naomi sat with the workers, not across, with. She didn't speak first. She waited. Let the frustration surface on its own terms. Listen to the pauses as much as the complaints. When she finally spoke, it was to clarify, not correct. To name the pattern everyone felt but no one had articulated. Ethan watched the shift, the way shoulders lowered, the way voices steadied. Afterward in the car, he said, "You never promised anything." "No," Naomi said. "I made the system visible." "That won't satisfy everyone." "It doesn't need to," she replied. "It needs to be honest." Word spread. Slowly. Not that Naomi had fixed anything, but that she had listened, that she didn't arrive with rehearsed empathy or executive distance. That mattered. The board meeting was tense, not hostile, calculated. Ethan stood at the head of the table, Naomi seated to his right this time. The positioning alone sent a message. Some members shifted uncomfortably. One spoke first. "This role of hers," he said, gesturing vaguely, "it's undefined." "Yes," Ethan said. "By design." "That's not governance." "It's adaptation," Ethan replied, "which this company has done before." Another board member leaned in. "And what happens when she leaves?" Naomi answered before Ethan could. "Then you'll have to decide whether what changed was me," she said calmly, "or how you listen." The room went quiet. Ethan felt a flicker of pride he didn't bother to hide. Not in the defiance, in the clarity. The motion passed. Narrowly. No celebration. No dissent recorded. That night, Naomi sat alone in her apartment, the city lights softer through rain-streaked glass. She removed the name tag from her bag. The old one. Staff. She turned it over in her hand, tracing the worn letters. She thought of the years she had spent trying to disappear just enough to survive. Of the silence she had chosen because noise felt too dangerous. Power, she realized, wasn't the opposite of invisibility. It was the willingness to be seen without asking for permission. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "You did well today," she replied after a moment. "So did you." He did not answer. That was fine. The following week, a reporter called. Then another. Ethan declined interviews. Naomi was never mentioned by name. That was also intentional. Change. Ethan had learned lasted longer when it wasn't performed. On a Friday evening, as the building emptied and the lights dimmed floor by floor, Ethan found Naomi in the lobby waiting for the bus. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said, gesturing to the street. "I know," she replied. "I still like it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the doors slide open and shut as people passed through. "You ever regret not pushing sooner?" Ethan asked. Naomi considered the question. "No," she said finally. "I regret the time it took me to believe my voice mattered even if no one was listening." He nodded. "I regret the opposite." The bus arrived. Naomi stepped on, turned once. "This isn't the end," she said. "I know," Ethan replied. "It's the part where it gets quieter." She smiled at that. The doors closed. The bus pulled away, taillights disappearing into traffic. Ethan stood there a moment longer than necessary, then turned back toward the building. It felt different now, less imposing, more honest. Inside systems were shifting. Slowly, unevenly, but for the first time in years, they were shifting in the open, and that he knew was how real change began. The first headline didn't mention her name. It talked about market confidence, about cautious optimism, about a legacy manufacturer navigating a complex global landscape with unexpected steadiness. Analysts used phrases like recalibration and disciplined restraint. Investors liked it. The stock ticked upward, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. Naomi read the article over coffee at her kitchen table. The paper shook slightly in her hands, not from nerves, but from age. She folded it carefully and set it aside. Being absent from the story did not bother her. In some ways, it confirmed that the work was holding. At headquarters, the mood had changed again. Less tension now, more awareness. People spoke with fewer rehearsed phrases. Meetings ended on time. Decisions took longer, but when they landed, they stuck. Ethan noticed something else. People disagreed with him more openly, not aggressively, thoughtfully. It unsettled him at first. Then it grounded him. One afternoon, a junior engineer challenged a timeline Ethan had approved weeks earlier. In the past, that would have irritated him. This time he listened. Naomi sat nearby, saying nothing, watching the exchange unfold without interference. Afterward, Ethan turned to her. "You taught them that." "No," she said. "You allowed it." The board pushed back harder. A special session was called, framed as a routine governance review. It wasn't. The questions were sharper, the tone colder. One board member spoke plainly. "You've shifted authority without formal restructuring." Ethan didn't flinch. "I've shifted accountability. That's semantics." "No," Ethan said. "It's survival." Naomi listened from the side of the room. She had not been invited to speak. That was intentional, too. Another board member leaned forward. "This company was built on clear lines." "Yes," Ethan replied. "And it nearly collapsed because no one crossed them." Silence followed, then a vote, not to reverse anything, just to watch, to wait, to see if this new equilibrium would hold. After the meeting, Claire caught up to Naomi in the hallway. "They're nervous." "They should be," Naomi replied. "Change without spectacle makes people uneasy." Ethan's father appeared in his dreams that week, not speaking, just watching from the edge of the factory floor, hands on hips, grease on his knuckles. Ethan woke before dawn, heart heavy, unsure why. He drove to the plant alone that morning, walked the floor without announcing himself, talked to workers, listened more than he spoke. At lunch, he sat with Naomi in the cafeteria. Plastic trays, paper napkins, no entourage. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She looked at him. "Sometimes. And then I think about what happens if I don't stay," she said. He nodded. "That's how I feel too." The Germans sent another message, this one warmer. An invitation to a joint summit the following quarter. Location neutral. Agenda open. "They're committing," Marcus said. "They're curious," Naomi corrected. "Commitment comes later." A different email arrived that afternoon, this one addressed to Naomi directly. The sender was familiar, a former colleague from years ago resurfacing cautiously. "I heard you're back. They tried to bury you. You didn't stay buried." Naomi read it twice, then replied with a single sentence. "I was never buried. I just stopped shouting." The resistance inside the company did not vanish. It softened. A few more departures followed. Quiet ones. Others adapted, learned. Some surprised her. One of the VPs who had first pushed back asked for her input on a regional issue. Not publicly. In private. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He listened. That was enough. Late one evening, as the building emptied, Ethan and Naomi stood by the window again. This had become a habit neither of them acknowledged. "You're going to be asked to formalize this," Ethan said. "Title, scope, visibility." Naomi considered that. "I'll say no." He smiled slightly. "I thought you might." "They'll keep asking." "Yes." And eventually she said it won't matter." He turned to her. "You've changed how I think about power." She raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "I used to think it was something you defended," he said. "Now I think it's something you share or it turns on you." She nodded. "That's usually how it goes." The next morning, the second headline broke. This one mentioned culture. Quietly. Buried in the business section. An analyst noted that the company's recent steadiness appeared to stem from internal realignment rather than aggressive expansion. A sentence stood out. Sources suggest leadership has embraced an unusually transparent advisory model. Naomi smiled when she read it. Not because it praised her, because it named something real. At lunch, she walked past her old cleaning cart still parked near the maintenance closet. The name tag hung from the handle. Staff. The letters faded from years of use. She didn't remove it this time. She just touched it. A brief acknowledgement. Then she kept walking. That afternoon, Ethan announced the date for the signing ceremony. Modest, no spectacle. Limited press. "It's time," he said. Naomi nodded. "It is." The night before the signing, Ethan sat alone in his office again. He looked out over the city lights blinking like distant signals. He thought of all the decisions he had made alone, convinced that solitude was strength. He understood now that it had also been fear. Across town, Naomi sat by her window, the city quieter at this hour. She thought of the younger version of herself standing in foreign rooms, translating words for men who never learned to hear her. She wished she could tell that woman something. Not that it would get better, but that it would get clearer. The next day would bring closure of one chapter and the opening of another. Not a triumph, not a rescue, a recognition. And sometimes Naomi thought that was the most radical outcome of all. The morning of the signing arrived without ceremony, the kind of quiet that comes when tension has already burned itself out. Naomi stood near the back of the conference room as people filtered in. Executives in muted suits, legal teams with folders tucked under their arms, a few reporters setting up cameras careful not to draw attention. The glass walls reflected a version of the room that looked calmer than it felt. Ethan Cole entered last. Not late. Deliberate. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning the space the way he always did, but this time his eyes stopped when they found Naomi. He nodded once, not as a signal, as acknowledgement. The German delegation arrived moments later. Vogel first steady and composed, Richter beside him carrying a leather portfolio worn at the edges. Lucas followed, expression sharper than the others but no longer dismissive. When Vogel saw Naomi, he inclined his head. Small. Precise. Respect given without display. The documents were laid out. Thick paper, heavy ink. Years of negotiation distilled into language that pretended certainty while guarding against risk. Ethan took his seat. Naomi remained standing. That was intentional. When the cameras rolled, Ethan spoke briefly. No speeches about vision, no inflated promises. He talked about responsibility, about durability, about learning when to slow down instead of forcing momentum. Then, without theatrics, he said her name. Before we sign, he said voice, even there's someone I want to acknowledge. Naomi felt the room tighten. She doesn't sit on this board. She doesn't have a title you'd recognize, but this agreement would not exist without her. No applause yet, just attention. She reminded us that understanding is not automatic, that listening is work, and that ignoring people because of where they stand is the fastest way to fail. He stopped there. He did not ask her to speak. He did not call her forward. He let the words settle. Vogel nodded once. Richter placed his hand flat on the table, a gesture of agreement that carried more weight than clapping ever could. The papers were signed. Pens passed. Hands shook. The cameras clicked, capturing the moment as history unaware of how close it had come to collapse. As people dispersed, the energy shifted. Conversations loosened. Laughter surfaced in small pockets. Relief moved through the room like a tide pulling back. Claire approached Naomi quietly. "You did it," she said. Naomi shook her head. "It happened," she replied. "There's a difference." Ethan joined them. For a moment, none of them spoke. Outside the windows, the city moved on, indifferent to contracts and consequences. "You know they'll try to define you now," Ethan said. "Press? Board? Everyone." Naomi nodded. "They always do." "And you're fine with that." "I'm fine with being clear," she said. "Definitions come and go." Later, when the room had mostly emptied, Ethan found Naomi near the sideboard where she had once stood unnoticed. "I meant what I said," he told her. "About acknowledgement." "I know," she said. "And you didn't overdo it." He smiled faintly. "That was harder than it sounds." They stood together in the quiet that followed achievement, a silence that didn't demand anything else. That evening, Naomi walked home instead of taking the bus. The air was cool, the sidewalks damp from earlier rain. She passed the diner, where she used to sit alone, watching the world rush by without her. She did not go in. At her apartment, she set her bag down and took out the old name tag she had kept all these years. Staff. The letters worn smooth. She held it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer, not as a rejection, but as a record of where she had been. Across the city, Ethan sat in his office one last time that night. The documents were filed, the calls returned, the crisis officially over. He looked at the reflection in the glass, older than he used to think, steadier than he had been. He understood now that leadership was not about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about knowing when to make space for the one that mattered. The next morning, life inside the building resumed. Meetings, deadlines, arguments. But something subtle had changed. People paused before speaking, listened a second longer, thought twice about who might be hearing them. Naomi arrived as she always did. Early, quiet, visible now but unchanged. She took her seat near the window, opened her notebook, and began preparing for the work that would never make headlines but would shape outcomes all the same. Because power, she had learned, was not about being seen once. It was about being heard when it counted and staying when the noise faded. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Dignity still matters.